Hi, my name is Mike O'Connor, and welcome to The Actualized Self, where in each episode we talk with world-class performers and entrepreneurs building a better tomorrow to learn the tactics, tools, habits, and routines they employ to accomplish all that they do. Now today we're talking with Colin Jacobsen, who's the CEO of Arlene. And if I was going to try to explain Arlene and what they do in a sentence, I'd basically say they're making the world of virtual and augmented reality 3D very, very accessible to normal people like you and me, and doing it through building tools and resources to on people into the quote unquote metaverse or whatever you call it. Colin explains this all so much better than I can. So without further ado, I'm going to let you just see this episode with Colin. But please let me know your feedback or how we can improve the podcast and make it better. Without further ado, here's Colin. Awesome. So excited to have Colin Jacobsen with us today. Colin is the CEO of Arlene, and I am so pumped he's with us. He's a good friend of mine. And Colin, if you could, can you tell us a little bit about you and the origin story for the company that you have?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, Mike, thank you for having me on. Really nice to speak with you about this. I guess originally, even just going back past my professional career and all that, I'm a West Coast person that was raised in Southern California originally. Went from being kind of like a chill surfer person to ultimately moving out to the East Coast, where I became a bit more of an uptight person that just walks super quickly and curses constantly and all that. But really through my evolution, I've been working in New York for my entire career, basically. I've worked primarily in advertising tech. So programmatic advertising and some of the kind of like older ad network kind of models, I was super familiar with that. So worked at, I was at AOL originally, working on their business analytics. Was really focused on delivering ad campaigns back then. So this is over 10 years ago during the 2012 election that was happening. So doing a lot of like Barack Obama campaigns and like Mitt Romney campaigns and a lot of these like major super PACs that had really big budgets. At that point, they were getting interested in like mobile and also more of this like programmatic kind of technology. So how can you like automatically purchase advertisements and run these real-time auctions within 200 milliseconds and really efficiently just purchase ad inventory that was out there. So through that, I was super interested in advertising behind that. I also, I guess before I got into advertising, there was another startup company that I did a little bit of work with. It was like not even a year that I was with that company, but more of a fintech kind of company over there. But it just, from that whole experience, I basically it was a terrible startup experience. Like I worked constantly. The team didn't really have a cohesive vision behind it. I was the only commercial person, but just really not a lot of direction for someone that came straight out of college. So for me, moving from that little thing that happened over there into kind of like more corporate America, I was working for AOL at that point. They put me through like a formal training program, and I got to just learn everything about the industry in there and learn the terminology behind it. And it was a really great just learning moment for me to kind of like get my foot in the door behind all this. My next progression, so I was there for about a year and a half, and then I went over to a company called MoPub. And MoPub was basically one of the original programmatic advertising focused companies for apps. And this was like during the early 2010s. You had a really big movement of this big app economy out there. Nowadays people hang out. There's probably 3-4 different apps that people are hanging out in pretty regularly. The major social media apps, maybe some like news apps, and maybe some messaging apps that are out there. Beforehand, it was any type of app that you could possibly think of, whether they're measurement apps or utility apps or calculator apps or just tons of different apps out there that people were just trying to put advertisements into. So it was a really great opportunity. I got into my first client-facing position from there. I was also working on the publisher part of the business, so working directly with these app developers to ultimately consult with them on their monetization strategies that they were putting together behind this. So this was interesting because it was, really just pulling multiple levers behind this to really optimize ad campaigns behind it. Is it trying to get as much revenue as possible, put as many advertisements in front of the user as possible, or is it taking a more tactful approach behind it where people are going to respect the UX behind it and ultimately, get good like app ratings behind it while also having like pretty decent revenue come into the mix behind that. So that was, in working at MoPub, I was there for a little bit, then like an acquisition happened, so Twitter came in. We got bought by the Twitter organization a few weeks before they went public. So joining Twitter, going through the whole going public process over there was just a super interesting time to be like a mid-20s person living in New York and just learning a new career skills and working with different partners and, really just being at the forefront of this mobile movement that was happening over there. So, Twitter was, I liked working at Twitter. It didn't really have that corporate feel that AOL had. And even within the MoPub team that we were on over there, it was an independent business unit. So we had a lot of autonomy over there, and it really felt similar to how MoPub felt before the acquisition happened, basically. So when it came to, learning my startup skills and taking an agile approach to development, when it came to, taking an iterative approach to testing product and stuff like that, that came directly from the MoPub organization. And, I spent about 5 years over there working with app developers, working with ad network partners, worked with DSP partners, and even I led commercialization efforts down in Latin America for a little bit. So got to do a few trips, like Brazil trips and Chile trips and Argentina trips to meet with some of the hottest app developers and agency partners and ad networks and these different types of people down there. Through that whole process, I was just talking to app developers constantly, talking to advertisers constantly, and hearing about what is the new trend in the industry right now? What are people dipping their toes into right now? What are people interested in? And there's a few different topics over there, like native advertising, for example, was something that was super popular. These are advertisements that kind of look like the app that you're looking at the ad, basically. So it kind of has the look and feel. It feels pretty natural, and they're similar to kind of what a promoted tweet or something like that is. There were video placements, so rewarded video or skippable video or other kind of places like that. And then there was people that were interested in 3D and augmented reality and virtual reality and some of these newer types of technologies that were coming out then. You had the Magic Leap organization and raised significant money back then. Oculus was starting to get a little bit of noise back then. You had people in New York, there were thousands of people chasing Pokemon characters over Central Park and some of these key locations over there. So looking at this technology, it's hey, this is, humans are super visual people, they're creative, they're looking for ways to engage. These are really the gamification behind these, the 3D, the different dimensions behind it. It truly is a really cool visual canvas to work with. And just digging deeper into it, there are app developers, there are advertisers, there are a bunch of people that were interested in doing transactions behind this. But what we quickly discovered with it is not much was happening with it. You had all these major infrastructure investments that happened, but ultimately there were pretty high technical barriers of entry, especially for people that were more on the creative and the marketing part of the business over there. Wasn't really a turnkey way for people to start creating these assets and to create these activations and to take a cross-channel approach behind it, to take a data-driven approach behind it. So that's where we saw the opportunity. And that was ultimately, I started doing a little bit of research when I was in my full-time position within the Twitter organization. But it quickly got to a point where I needed to focus on it as a full-time position, basically, and not have any distractions behind that, and just kind of really go all in. And yeah, that was the genesis behind all this.
That's super cool, and I appreciate the detail and some of the the context and pieces that sort of got you to where you are. What lessons did you take from MoPub Going through that, I have to assume in your, I think at that point you were mid-20s, right? When you were working for them, but going through that entire process of being at this really innovative company, relatively small team, and then getting acquired by Twitter, and just seeing the entire sort of sequence of events that happened, what lessons have you taken from that and applied to Arlene?
I think that the biggest lesson that I've taken from that is taking like a super customer-centric approach to everything. So constantly talking to the customers that you're working with, constantly collecting feedback from the customers that you're working with, constantly taking like a pulse on, people that are in the industry. You might not be working with them. They might be opportunities for you. They might be working with one of your competitors or something like that. And just constantly having a dialogue with these people. What is it that they're looking for? What are the pain points behind it? What are the revenue opportunities? If we remove some of those pain points, what could that ultimately lead to behind that? And that was something that at MoPub, we were almost 100% customer focused when it came to creating what our product roadmap was, and when it came to our prioritizations and who we were meeting with and who we were writing emails back to. Even in terms of like the support services within the business. When I first joined MoPub originally, there was, basically like an account manager and like a support at mopub.com like email when people had problems that they would reach into behind that. But then you had a case of there'd be an account manager that had, like a 5K per day account over there, and also like a 200K per day account. One of those accounts might have like a full team of people working over there. One of them might be like a mom and pop app publisher or something like that that's like pretty easy to work with. So ultimately, like the customer service organization needs to be like built to be reflective of that, to make sure that you can like take that business in, you can properly service it, you can scale everything behind that, but then also using that to carefully take this feedback from people and being able to communicate that to your product part of the business, your development part of the business, and making sure that you're prioritizing everything in there. So that's, with the Arlene business right now, we're launching our tools business basically, which is we have some like subscription tools that we're going to market with right now, which is fundamentally a bit of a shift in our business model. We're definitely more like demand generation focus and content marketing focus and kind of different marketing sales techniques than what we were doing beforehand, which was do a PowerPoint pitch to people, spend 1 to 2 months going through that whole sales cycle behind it. And so it's, as we get into these new customer types over here, we have free users, we have different types of paid users, and all these really represent different customer segments and different obtainable markets that we're going after with our business right now. So messaging has to be different for these people. Servicing has to be different for them. How you convert people across all these different paid tiers, there needs to be kind of like an underlying fiber underneath that where, you're able to kind of like create new opportunities for people that are in these different segments of your business. But ultimately, we're still a startup company over here. So every person that's coming in right now, free user, paid user, whoever, we're emailing these people, we're Twitter DMing these people, we're talking to these people, we're having conversations with them. It can be a 16-year-old high school student. It can be like a senior advertising tech person, depending on like who's using the tools and the different use cases behind it. So we're in that process right now. We have our product roadmap, but we're constantly updating it in terms of like, hey, there's new revenue opportunities, or the industry shifted a different direction over here. A year ago, everyone's talking about like NFT projects and Metaverse projects and all that. Even if you go to the Arlene webpage right now, you still see some of that like Metaverse kind of language in there. But the tools that we're launching, which are WebXR tools, these are tools that are more augmented reality focused and 3D focused and virtual reality focused. So ultimately, like, the industry is moving towards Metaverse and NFTs and stuff like that. And there's a lot of companies that were specific to that. Our tech is still applicable towards those kind of companies over there, but they're more so like a white paper for us right now, or like a type of vertical that we can play around with. There's also like advertising. There's like, like product visualizations. There's gimmicky little social filters and stuff like that, So it's just, there's different parts that we're playing around with right now and carefully interviewing people, looking at the revenue opportunities behind it, and then prioritizing all that accordingly.
I think I would love to hear you speak on, just like hearing, like knowing a bit about the company and knowing about all the different sort of plays and possible sort of use cases from, just having the benefit of knowing you for quite some time. I'm probably sort of biased in my view, but when you're describing the value proposition of Arlene, obviously you're going to sort of pitch that differently to everybody or explain it differently to everybody. But if you're talking broadly, right, just for your average layperson who's interested in technology but isn't a coder per se, how do you sort of pitch the broad use case of Arlene?
Yeah, it's you bring up an interesting question with it because I mentioned there's the new tools that we're going to market with right now, which Arlene as a business, for lack of better words at this point, like Arlene is turning into more of like the holding company behind everything. So Arlene is our vision with Arlene is to help, creation and help people get into this space, whether that's through like consulting work that we're doing, whether that's through the tools that we're developing, whether that's through like research and development projects. Like with the Arlene business, like those are kind of like the different components behind it. Now we have the web XR tools, which we're going to market with right now. And this has been an interesting exercise because it's a different entity than what Arlene is. It lives independent from Arlene. It's within the Arlene umbrella, but it's ultimately a little bit of a different market. It's positioned a little bit differently. The pricing model is different behind it. The business model is different. Target audience is different. And so, we've been launching these tools and we've kicked off some marketing campaigns behind it, but it's, really the messages that we're using for it are really important when we kind of take a look at like, what is our obtainable market? What is the addressable market? What is the serviceable addressable market versus like the total addressable market behind that? These are kind of like different segments of people behind it. You go to WebXR tools right now, I would say it's more leaning towards like computer graphics kind of people that would use it right now in terms of like going in there and they might have some light 3D assets that they were building in like Unity or Unreal Engine or some of those places beforehand. And they're looking to create like web activations behind it. Or even a lot of these kind of like social filter people that do like Insta filters or TikTok filters or Snapchat filters. This gives them like an easy way to take their 3D creations and basically put them into like web channels, basically. Now, that's not what our end target market is. That's what our obtainable market is right now. That's like what we have developed as a platform over here. That is the low-hanging fruit that we can start to reach out to. Those are the people that we're actively messaging, those people right now. But then it's ultimately going to have this evolution as a business, like what's going to be originally focused on computer graphics people that want to do web-based AR activations will ultimately turn into more like what are like Canva users. Like, anybody can really use Canva and create in there. We would ultimately like our tools so anybody can go in there and there's like templates that they can use. There's like easy assets that they can like pick from different places. And it's just like a super turnkey process behind that. Now, all that is going into our content calendar and our marketing plan right now. And like, how are we going to reach these people? And like, to begin with, like, you go to the WebXR Tools webpage right now, and like you go to the header right there, it says, I think, no low-code tools or build AR/VR without code. That's what it has on there. And I think like we chose it because we're like, yeah, we built like a no-code platform. We're removing the technical barriers of entry behind this. Like people that are creators, they don't want to deal with technical, they don't want to write coding, so this is like an easy way for them to put AR/VR out there. But is that the right message to approach to these people? Because you have, someone who might be making like 2D graphics, or they might be, publishing on like Unity or something like that. This is like more of, hey, take, do 3D creations and put them on the web over here. Like elevate your 3D creations, like, increase your audiences behind this, make this easier, more accessible for people. So, we're deeply looking into those kind of messages in terms of like what's on our webpage right now, like what, like when I tweet something or when I write back to somebody's like Twitter post or Insta post or something like that, what are the keywords that we're using behind that? What are these like, what are we trying to push out there? And what are people, people need to remember one sentence about Arlene, what's going to stick in their head.
Yeah. And
so anyways,
yeah. Oh, sorry. Yeah. For you, what is that one sentence, right? Because there are so many, and this is like, I think the fascinating thing about an infrastructure build that you're doing in pardon the phrase, but like a Wild West technology, right? Where things are just popping up very, very quickly and changing very, very quickly, right? And here you are, you're trying to sort of create some level of sort of foundation when everything is sort of, changing pretty quickly around you. When you talk about that one sentence value proposition, how do you sort of see that? And if, knowing that you're probably going to tell me this today and then like in a month, it'll be a little different.
Yeah, so I guess long story short, we were like in the process of like remapping what that message is going to be. So we've actually been using like a few like AI tools and stuff like that recently to come up with like, we literally have a list of like 50 different messages that we're going through right now, kind of taking different pieces of it and putting them together and like crafting what it's going to be. But really the message that we're trying to put out there is that we're trying to create a democratization of the creation of this type of technology out here. We're trying to make it more accessible for people. We're trying to make it easier for people. Because, even, like looking at the prices that we have in the business model that we're coming out to right now and looking at the past projects that we've done, we've worked with like, big companies, like big fashion companies and agency partners and stuff like that. Those were, like 6-figure projects. Those were like $50,000 projects. These were like massive projects that we were doing for these types of companies. We kind of reached a point with it where even those kind of companies are like, we don't know what to pay for this. We don't know like what kind of return on investment we're getting behind this. Like we don't know what to do with this. There's still like this big like education factor behind it. But the common denominator is like people, they look at it similar to how they look at like their YouTube channel or like their Insta channel or like other places that they could potentially get traction from their users, other places that they can do user acquisition, they could potentially get a return on investment over there. But people, especially when we're having a global economic crisis right now, people don't want to put a 6-figure investment into one of these types of activations without taking a scaled approach behind it and like dipping their toes into it. So also meeting people with these prices, free, like $25 per month, $100 per month. These are pretty reasonable prices to put in front of people to start using this type of technology over there. So, that's really when we're pushing this democratization behind it. That's what we're getting at with this. We're trying to get as many people as possible using our tools right now. We have our revenue targets, we have all that, but we want thousands of people that are on there right now playing with it, creating projects, adding value with it. Like students learning new skill sets to improve their resume for the future. People that, got laid off recently that are interested in like changing their career a little bit. Like D2C companies on the Shopify platform want to have like 3D AR product visualizations that didn't want to pay $5,000 for some like 3D asset of whatever product they have. They're trying to take an easier, more lightweight approach behind it, and that's the infrastructure that we're offering to people.
That's super cool, and I'd argue that you're offering this value proposition of a different type and a deeper level of brand engagement with so many different places that you're working with. And
it's something too that's like unique about our business is, we're a few years into this right now, and it hasn't been a perfect process. We've had our ups and downs of the business and all that. But, the past 1 year, like we raised like venture capital funding. We've gotten our technical partner as a full-time person in the business. Like we've really kind of hit this galvanizing point within the business right now. And the first few years, it's not as if those were wasted years in the business because frankly, we were taking these bigger projects. We were working with their creative teams over there. We were working with a 3D designer, the producers behind this. That inherently gave us a ton of feedback to work with and was essentially kind of like paid research and development for our company over here. So like projects that we've done with like Coach beforehand, or projects that we've done like other major entities like that, we built those projects, but then there was also libraries and templates and stuff like that that came from those projects over there that we were able to put into our toolkit that we were developing. And now we've, over the past couple of years, I think the biggest issue is we've almost had this like junkyard full of tools all over, like they're kind of like half-baked or like fully baked, but they're just kind of like disconnected all over. Now we've basically taken them, put them together into this WebXR tools package that we have, and then we're creating the storytelling behind that.
Yeah, that's super cool. If we're talking like really specific use cases, right? Because I think for me the Shopify one is really easy to sort of wrap my mind around. And I think content creators, I would love to hear you talk a little bit about where do you see just business models that I think people are really familiar with, like use cases for a restaurant, right? Use cases for something like a content creator. How do you see like Arlene really sort of being a helpful entity to businesses like that?
Yeah, totally. So, ultimately, depending on who we're talking to or like what platform we're plugging into, there's different objectives behind it, different metrics that people are trying to hit. But kind of in the current climate that we're living in right now, especially on the business front, people, they care about post-click conversions. They care about post-click activity. They don't really care about just like engagement on like a particular ad unit or an activation or something like that. So it's, when the businesses that we're working with right now, it's like either like they're using this for like 3D AR product visualization. So they have like a web page or they have an app or something like that where they would like people to be able to have like the immersive preview, to be able to like zoom in on it, to be able to like click on little hot points behind it, to like learn more about it over there. And then also having that AR preview behind it. People want to be able to like visualize what it looks like within, I don't know, their living room or their office or, wherever their location is behind that. So those use cases, like we see really interesting metrics behind those. We see a direct correlation with like increase in sales conversions. We see a direct correlation with increase in average order value behind that. We also see a decrease in the return rate behind that. And returns, that is like a whole industry on its own. It's like a $550 billion industry out there, so being able to show people, hey, we got like a 20% decrease on return rate because people were able to better educate themselves on the product before they ultimately purchased it. It's a super powerful metric to have for people over there. Now, we're in this kind of like unique position where, it's been a year and a half since like we've kind of returned to a little bit more of like a normal living after this whole COVID pandemic and all that. But there's been fundamentally kind of shifts in how retail businesses are right now. Like retail locations, they know that people might not necessarily be visiting a retail location with a purchase intent. They know that they're looking for more like entertainment or looking to go home and make the purchase after that. Places are looking to increase their foot traffic right now. So like using QR codes to like create cool activations that people can play around with, ways that we can kind of increase more eyeballs that are walking past your storefront or, like checking out different articles of clothing or whatever when they're in their store. We were talking, the product. Okay. Product visualization help like sales conversions, average order value, decrease in the return rates. Another thing for businesses right now is, after the COVID pandemic, there's been kind of a fundamental shift in terms of how retail locations are positioned right now. So, people are looking for more entertainment. They're looking for more community behind it. You go to like a Lululemon right now, they're having like yoga classes over there. You go to like a RAF location, it's like biking communities behind that. They have like a coffee counter over there. You go to Kith, they have like cereal counter and like other projects and like NFT communities and stuff like that they're playing around with over there. So there's been this fundamental shift in how these companies are doing business right now. And this technology that we're creating over here, it creates like a cool way to essentially connect that offline world to the online world. You're in a physical location, you can have a QR code that can lead to something that's a cool digital activation behind that. that's something that can either increase your foot traffic in a location, or that's something that people put that in their pocket and they have something that's entertaining, magical that they can go home with, and they're going to remember the company from that. Taking that even one step further, in the actual activations that we're putting together, it's having like, hey, enter your email address here, or hey, do you want to purchase this? Integrating into their CRM system. So it's a really seamless process behind it in terms of like who we're collecting information from, and can we tie that back to helping to facilitate an easier purchase.
So cool.
So I think those are, when we're talking to these kind of companies, those are typically the types of conversations that we're having.
That's really, really, really awesome to hear. And switching gears a little bit, Colin, seeing all the progress that you guys have made in the last year, and all the different styles of leadership, I have to assume you've had to sort of take on, where you're sort of switching from, okay, we're a 2-person team versus a 4-person team versus, we're in growth stage versus we're really sort of trying to get foundation here. We're changing our policies to better reflect the team environment that we have. What habits and routines have you utilized to really sort of stay focused and to really sort of keep the eye on the ball for where you are now?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And actually, like when I was working at Twitter before joining Arlene, I was never in a management position. I was always an individual contributor throughout my entire career. So starting the company, it's been this interesting evolution where, when you're 1 or 2 people that's in the company, you're owning multiple positions and you're just in this like peer kind of operator position behind that. Often you feel like a kind of charlatan behind that. You walk into meetings or you're meeting with people or talking, pitching to somebody, and you're like, should I even be in this right now? But then you kind of gain your confidence behind it. And you have enough of those meetings where you get used to it. But it's as we raise money and increase our revenue with the business and hired more people. We have, I think, almost 10 people that are working for us right now. I've had to become a manager, and I've had to, work on my leadership abilities behind this. And there's no silver bullet solution behind it. I think that there's certainly lessons that I've learned. I think being an empathetic person, using empathy, leading with that, and, really trying to see where people are coming from, trying to put yourself into their perspective, trying to take that type of approach behind it. That's been a pretty effective approach. There's been conversations that, text conversations that might lead to somebody thinking a certain way. Just getting on a meeting with those, having a conversation with them, kind of getting to the bottom of it. It's like it's definitely a better way to get to the bottom of something that's a problem for your organization, or trying to solve something together behind that. With the empathy part behind it, I've also just like in terms of like psychology and all that, I've been going like deeper down the rabbit hole with all that, and lots of these concepts, like opinions, thoughts and opinions, and like tying those back to individuals and like ultimately what is tied to people. So sometimes people might say a certain opinion, they might tell you something, but they don't actually mean that. They're rooted in kind of like a different, different traumas or different biases or different approaches or different cultural differences or whatever behind it. So being able to really kind of identify those moments and trying to be able to kind of have that human connection with people and to kind of see eye to eye with them in terms of what they're trying to communicate with you. It's been pretty effective taking that approach. I'm a firm believer in the Pareto principle. So I'm a big like 80-20 person. I'm not really like a perfectionist kind of person. I think like right now for our business, we had this big debate internally. It's like, do we wait 3 or 4 more weeks to have like better marketing materials that we put out, or do we just start posting content right now? Mm-hmm. And really where we netted out with that is let's start posting content right now. And we're going to improve the process. It's going to get better over the next few weeks, but it's trying not to create this like paralysis and trying not to continue to kick the can down the road. Ultimately erring towards doing some kind of action, some kind of movement, something that ultimately progresses everything moving forward. Those are probably the main principles I've been operating off of.
That's awesome. I mean, empathy and bias towards action, I think, are just two principles that are so broadly applicable and help in so many different ways. Given all the spaces that you inhabit, Colin, just as a closing question, and your knowledge of tech, the fact that you're on the front lines of a lot of different converging pieces that I think one could argue or maybe meet in the middle in some ways or not. What are you most excited about in the world ahead, and how do you recommend people sort of prepare for it?
I think we're in a really interesting time right now. I think before I had mentioned geopolitical problems, there's like economic recession that's happening right now. There's like a ton of people in the tech industry that got laid off recently. Even for our technology, I talked about Metaverse has like negative publicity, and a lot of these like NFT projects and stuff like that we've previously dabbled with some of those projects. It has some negative publicity right now, and for me, like where this ultimately nets out is like we've been living in this like massive bubble world for the past few years. Things have been moving up and to the right constantly. There's been huge multiples for businesses, like massive rounds of fundraising, really big exits, companies going public and all that. Just real estate markets like going bonkers and all that. And we're at a bit of a reset right now. This moment, it's almost as if we're, especially for some of these like newer types of technology, we've entered this like trough of disillusionment right now, where there's a lot of like overhyped projects to begin with, kind of came crashing down a little bit, and we're starting to see a bit of an uptick again right now, but with more projects that are, like realistic and grounded in revenue numbers and grounded in actually solving problems for people, things that aren't as like speculative as beforehand. So at least like in the industries that I'm playing around with right now, I'm feeling pretty optimistic of that. And as a company, we raised a round of like venture capital funding a little bit under a year ago. And it's certainly a tough fundraising climate right now. But we also have pretty decent runway as a business. And still, like the earlier stage companies, we're still seeing some pretty active investments that are happening in them simply because, theoretically probably 3-4 years out for some kind of liquidity event or exit or going public or anything like that. So, still a lot can happen during that time period, and people are still willing to put investments into those types of companies. I think just when I take a step back from that and I look at kind of like other trends that are happening and other, businesses and verticals that are seeing success right now, I think I see a lot of super interesting things that are happening with like mental health. People trying to kind of improve how they're problem solving or, handling like triggered moments, better approaching like past traumas and stuff like that, ultimately do have an impact on their day-to-day personal and professional lives out there. That's something I'm super interested in that type of technology. Just constantly taking a look at, I look at Twitter constantly. I see new companies that are coming out. I try to be a part of those conversations. And that's where I'm at.
Awesome. Colin, where can people find you and learn more about your work?
Yeah, so I haven't been like super active on my social media accounts, but I'm just getting to be active on them again. So I've got like a LinkedIn page that I'm going to be posting pretty regularly from them, and then my Twitter account also. So it's at the CA Burrito is the handle behind it. And I'm going to be just putting more thought leadership on there, showing like different use cases. Like I'm over here creating like 3D projects and stuff like that, so like doing screen recordings of that and like putting that out there in public. And then obviously I'll be engaging with all like the Arlene account, the WebXR tools account, and stuff like that. And for anybody that's out there listening to this, we're definitely looking for as many people testing the tools right now as possible and trying to collect as much feedback as possible, and totally get it that it might not be as relevant for some of the people that are listening to this, but people that are more kind of creative leaning or have worked with computer graphics beforehand, this might be something that's up their alley right now.
Well, I'll definitely link to
when we're the Canva of this type of technology, obviously be a bigger market behind that.
No, completely. And I'll link to the tools, and it will also say that they're really easy to use for what they are. And obviously, you and I have talked sort of a little bit offline about some of what's coming down the pipeline with your tools to make them even more broadly accessible, which I think is just going to expand that market even more. So thank you. This has been awesome and really great to get some insight.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, thanks for having me.
Awesome. Thanks, Colin.